So let's take a focused look at the new Knight Abominant, just how strong is this new warp-infused Chaos Knight? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're back for a unit review, focusing on the full rules for the Chaos Knight Abominant, and putting together a few fun combos for how it might be used in-game. The leaked rules for the Chaos Knights haven't been out all that long, but just based on first impressions, this Psychic Knight does seem to be very powerful indeed. In the video, we'll talk over its datasheet and what it does, the chaotic knightly psychic powers that you can equip it with, a few of the very many options for buffs and synergies that the Chaos Knights can get, and then put some fun combos together with a few different build ideas and see just how much damage this thing can do. Those to get into, so let's jump straight into it. So the Knight Abominant is a Chaos Knights unit for 430 points and doesn't have any upgrades or options on its datasheet, so the main way that you'd actually want to spend more points on this would be those very nice favours of the Dark Gods upgrades. In general, it's a fairly typical Abhorrent class Knight, the new Chaos word for the Questoris chassis. So essentially, it's a standard Questoris class Knight that casts 2 psychic powers and has a set loadout with a big Volkite weapon in one arm and an Electro Scourge flail in the other. It has all the standard keywords that you might expect, as well as having the Terror Shades keyword, which allow it to use a few different abilities with those birds that roost in its rafters. The stat line's largely similar to the other Chaos Knights. It's got a 10-inch move now, as all the Abhorrents do. It still has the 3+ save and the 5+ invul, and the only major other stat line change is that it has 3 attacks rather than 4, but that kind of doesn't really matter all that much in the context of its close combat weapons. As we said, it'll cast 2 psychic powers and deny 1 each turn. We'll get to the psychic powers in just a second. And special rules wise, it has the Ion Shields 1, Super Heavy Walker to allow it to fall back and charge, and the standard Harbingers of Dread 1, the one that allows you to have multiple stacking debuffs or defensive buffs that go on throughout the game. Weapons wise, that Volkite Combuster has a 30-inch range, 6 shots at strength 10, AP -1 and damage 3, and like most Volkite weapons, it does extra wounds on 6s, causing 3 additional mortal wounds if you get a 6 to the wound roll. It makes it a pretty weird weapon, to be honest, having low AP but high damage, and those random extra mortal wounds that sometimes will appear and sometimes won't. It does mean that it's kind of a swingy weapon, to be honest. If you get a 6 or 2, then you're going to be doing masses of damage, but sometimes you might roll no 6s, and the low AP might mean that the enemy easily passes their saves. Just on average, turn on turn, it will do around 6 wounds to a toughness 7 or 8 vehicle, or kill around about 2 Space Marines with their new Armour of Contempt. It's definitely in a similar class to the other knightly weapons, though I'd say it's maybe a little bit weaker than things like the Rapid Fire Battle Cannon and the Thermal Cannon. It's then got the Diabolus Heavy Stubber, 4 shots at strength 5, no AP, and in melee it actually gets 2 different attacks, the Electro Scourge, which gets you triple attacks at strength 8, AP -2 and damage 3, and then also another D3 attacks that it makes with its Bale Mace tail thing at strength 8, AP -2 and damage 2. Overall, it's largely going to be fairly threatening against most things, maybe more so against heavy infantry more than anything else. On average, you get around about 7 wounds against a toughness 8, 3+ save vehicle, or 3 dead marines with Armour of Contempt. Not bad and quite general purpose. You certainly can get a lot more melee damage out of this thing with the right buffs, as we'll put together in a second. The profile is kind of okay, though I wouldn't say it's anything enormously special. Definitely the main draw to this thing are its psychic powers. A few of the discipline are kind of questionable, but the first one, Winds of the Warp, is absolutely auto-include, and I'd say that spell alone is kind of enough to justify the Abominant, or at least have it attract serious attention. Winds of the Warp is just a Warp Charge 6 spell. If you get it off, then you have a 5+ Feel No Pain, and what's more, if you cast on an 8+, then it gives War Dogs within 6 inches a 6+ Feel No Pain as well. 5+ Feel No Pain is just a monstrously good defensive buff. It equates to an extra 50% durability due to the chance of saving saves that you've already saved. So in effect, if you could guarantee this going off all game long, you'd essentially have a knight that's got 36 wounds rather than 24, at least from your opponent's perspective having to kill them. It kind of makes the Abominant into an absolute tank of a unit. With the spell up, it's probably the most durable unit in the Codex for the points cost, and the extra toughness it might provide to War Dogs is just icing on the cake. Basically, I'd certainly take that one, and then combo it with one of the others. Vortex of Terrors could be fun to try and mess with enemy units with the Dread abilities. The Storm Malevolent is really quite a potent enemy debuff. Getting +1 to wound and mortals on 6s can really mess up an enemy unit. I think Cyclonic Lamentation and Spite Squall are just a little bit situational for me. but Coruscating Hate could be another interesting Witchfire, the closest unit taking D3 mortal wounds, and if you happen to be up close and personal, you roll another dice for a good chance to take even more mortals. I think my go-to ones on the face of it will be Winds of the Warp and probably the Storm Malevolent. They kind of feel hard to go wrong with, massive extra durability, and a very decent buff to your melee power. You can always flex into Smite for a turn if you want a little bit of mortal wound output. In Codex Chaos Knights though, I think most of the strength just comes from the massive layers of rules that you can put on these knights, more so than their base stat lines. So here's just a few of the more relevant options. Iconoclast and Infernal are both great. I think Iconoclast in particular is really quite good for this one, as it gives you around 30 to 40% extra damage in melee. Having a low number of attacks and relatively low AP on the Electroscourge are both excellent things for making Iconoclast a good choice for this guy. Stratagems wise, I'm not really sure that this guy will be all that different to most other big knights. 2 CP for -1 damage in combat, 2 CP for a 4+ invul against shooting, 1 command point for Trail of Destruction to allow you to reroll 1s to hit versus an enemy on an objective, and 2 command points for Auto Explode. All of those seem like staples as and when they're going to be needed. One unique option to this guy is the Ravenous Terror Shades one. It allows one unit to take a Dread test and have a mortal wound per point failed in the morale phase. I think it's kind of unlikely to deal any massive damage unless you pick a really low leadership unit for it. I'd say that's most going to be useful in a turn where you just really need to remove the last couple of models on an objective or something. This could be a really cheeky and painful way to just evaporate the last couple of models in a squad. Potentially another stratagem that you could use if you want to pay 1 CP for it would be to make the knight Khorne. You get +1 weapon skill and +1 attack, usually meaning around about 60% better melee than you would have had before, and that could stack with Iconoclast as well. That'd push your damage output up to around 5 dead marines or around 11 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle. Certainly a lot stronger in combat, though I'm not really sure it's worth losing the 2 casts, and in particular that massive 50% increase to your durability. Might be pretty tempting on a second Abominant though if you are taking 2, as the first one will have nabbed the best powers. Moving on though into other good stuff, Favours of the Gods give you all manners of buffs, and there's plenty of good ones. Here's maybe just a few that are particularly relevant to the Abominant more than others though. The Pyrothrone for 35 points allows you to know 1 extra power and cast 1 extra, could allow you to even double up on Smite and the Witchfire in addition to Winds of the Warp. I guess the extra flexibility to choose from doesn't hurt either. Mirror of Fates for 20 points allows you to farm command points, so it's usually quite good, but if you happen to unlock the favoured ability, it could allow you to automatically dial in a 6 to wound with the Volkite weapon, guaranteeing you 3 mortal wounds out of it, never mind anything else. Otherwise, there's plenty of other strong ones. Subjugate a Machine Spirit could allow you to advance and shoot, which is quite good because you could also advance and cast as well. And then Beguiling Majesty for extra combat protection, Warpborn Stalker for deep strike, Blessing of the Dark Master, they're all good. Perhaps the one that you most don't want to use is Mark of the Dread Knight for the Feel No Pain, as you'll already be getting that from the Psychic. Warlord traits wise, probably my favourite are the Knight Diabolus for +1 to hits and reroll hit rolls of 1, but just taking objective secured could be handy too. If you're going all in for the Psychic Knights, you could take Warp Haunted Hull, which is an extra deny the Witch, and a little bit of protection against mortal wounds in the Psychic phase. Relics wise, the Twisted Mask is pretty handy for giving you +1 to cast, and even more flexibility by knowing another Warp Storm power. That's really good if you mainly just want to focus on the Psychic. And as a Terror Shades model, this one can take the Soul Raptor Swarm. It gives you a 4+ save against mortal wounds in general, again another nice defensive buff, and a nice extra rule that allows you to heal wounds for enemies fleeing nearby, though I guess that will be more relevant against some armies than others. For secondary objectives, theoretically you could do secondaries like Psychic Interrogation and things, though that would be a little bit disappointing to pass up on the 5+ Feel No Pain type save. I feel like if you're going to go for secondaries like that, it might be better on a knight with the Pyrothrone. That way at least you're only giving up 1 cast for the knight rather than 2. Potentially one weakness of this guy is that it does stop you taking Abhor the Witch against certain armies, like Grey Knights, Thousand Suns, or maybe even Tyranids these days, so I bear in mind that that is one weakness. Finally, for layered buffs and things, we have household buffs and synergies. If you were going Iconoclast, which does work out pretty nicely with its melee, Herpetrax does seem quite nice. The extra 4 wounds takes you to 28, and they'll go even further with the Feel No Pain. If you want to shoot a Herpetrax Knight into the ground with a 5+ Feel No Pain active, then on average you're going to have to plough through 42 wounds worth of Knight, which is pretty crazy. That household can also add you a -1 to hit relic as well, which certainly doesn't hurt on the durability front. Otherwise, Vextrix can give you a little bit of a shooting buff on those powerful Volkite shots, and there's a relic for +1 damage in melee, which works out nicely with the multiple attacks. And I think House Commentus is just generally all round strong. There's a relic that lets Terror Shades mark a unit for -1 AP, which could be a good synergy thing for the rest of your Chaos Knights. Finally, if you're using it as a Fellbond household or as a Dreadblade, there's one that you could use for bonus AP within 18 inches. That's quite nice with the Volkite's low AP. The generic melee buff one that gives you 6s to hit, generating additional hits in combat. And if you did really want to specialise in psychic defense, you could take this guy as a Dreadblade with +1 to deny the witch. I guess that could be kind of nice coupled with that warp haunted hull for an extra deny. Putting it all together, let's look at a few build ideas for the Abominant. I have a feeling that in reality you'd probably want to go some sort of middle road, some things that amp up its damage output, and some things that amp up its toughness, but I thought it could be kind of fun to investigate the extremes of what it could achieve. If we wanted to make ourselves a phenomenally tough knight, then of course it starts out strong with its 5+ feel no pain from the psychic power. It could be from House Herpetrax for 28 wounds, a 4+ invulve from the Veil of Medrengard relic, maybe the Blessing of the Dark Master for an undivided knight, so that the enemy can't do any rerolls against it. That's a really powerful defensive buff. And then maybe even throughout the game you might be able to pick up some -1s to hit from the Darkness Path of the Harbingers thing. Even if you haven't got to round 3 or 4 yet though, and you don't have a -1 to hit, it would still take around 54 lascannon shots to bring down this 460 point knight. Sorry, I think it is 460. I think I added up the Blessing of the Dark Master buff wrong there. Considering that a normal abhorrent class knight, say a rampager, would take around 23 lascannon shots to bring down, this is around about an extra 130% durability boost, never mind the absence of enemy rerolls. Seems like it could be a pretty reasonable knight to put front and centre to act as a bullet sponge. If instead we decided to aim for max psychic that we could put on one knight, we could make it an infernal Dreadblade for a +1 to deny, give it the Twisted Mask for knowing an extra power and +1 to cast, load up with a Tzeentch Pyrothrone for an extra cast, knowing an extra power, and the favoured ability that allows you to reroll a psychic test if you get it, and then give it the Warp Haunted Hull Warlord trait for an extra denial. Between that little lot, you've got really quite a potent Psyker on your hands, casting 3 powers per turn, maybe the Feel No Pain, the melee buff, and a Witchfire of some sort. It knows 4 powers and will get +1 to cast on them, and has 2 denials and a +1 to deny. Really quite nice on a tough unit that's likely to be venturing forwards. Might be a little bit overkill really going in on the psychic, but it did certainly make the psychic shenanigans go off very reliably. Finally, perhaps more for fun than anything else, I thought it might be interesting to see what a Khorne melee version of this might be able to achieve, if you not only give it a mark of Khorne, but also take most of the other melee buffs you could. This Abominant has become a Khorne Knight for +1 attack and +1 weapon skill, and it's done that by using the Blood Shield favour of the gods to allow it to ignore invulves once per game as well. On top of that, it's an Iconoclast for an extra AP -1 and +1 attack on the charge, has the Knight Diabolus Warlord trait for +1 attack and rerolling 1s to hit, and comes from a household that's taken the fell bond of exploding 6s to hit in melee. This one doesn't even have a relic either, so you could use that for something more durability focused. All of that adds up to a pretty whopping 18 attacks at strength 8, AP -3 and damage 3, all hitting on a 2+ and rerolling 1s to hit. You get extra hits on 6s, and you can also ignore invulves in an all-important combat once per game. Then just to add insult to injury, you also get those couple of Bale Mace attacks, also hitting on 2s rerolling 1s. On average, this guy kills around about 13 Space Marines with Armour of Contempt, does a crazy 37 wounds to a Toughness 7 vehicle, or around 23 wounds to a Toughness 8 vehicle with a 2+ save. Fairly safe to say that if this guy gets to attack on full profile, most normal units in the game will be absolutely flattened. I'm not 100% convinced that this wouldn't just be better to put on a Knight Rampager if you really do want a melee beatstick, but this guy would certainly beat the Rampager against elite infantry with 3 wounds, which do tend to be at least fairly common in the meta right now. So overall, I guess the main question for the Abominant is whether or not it's good enough to compete with the other Knights. Is this guy really worth taking over, say, a Despoiler with your choice of weapons? Comparing the ranged and melee damage, I do think that the optimal choices from the other knights probably do slightly outweigh what this guy can do. The Volkite's really quite a nice general purpose weapon, those mortal wounds are effective against most things. It's certainly not too bad against 3 wound infantry, but it's a little bit worse against things like tanks compared with the thermal cannon or the laser destructor on the Decimator. Typically, I'd also say that against most targets, you're probably going to be better off with a Reaper Chainsword or Warp Strike Claw. This guy again does hold his own quite well against heavy infantry, but if you are fighting hard targets with a ton of wounds, then typically things like the Warp Strike Claw are going to perform a fair bit better. Typically I'd expect somewhere between 20 and 50% extra damage from a knight with a claw or chainsword, depending on the exact target and how much invul they have. Overall for weapons and damage, I'd rate it as a little bit worse than say something like a Despoiler, but for me I feel that the two psychic powers do probably make it worth taking over them. It's just kind of hard to argue with a knight that is likely to be getting a plus 50% durability boost all game, never mind whatever the other power happens to do. I'd say that kind of defensive buff is usually going to outweigh the slight negative of a bit less offense, though I guess it does depend on what your knight's trying to set up to do. I'd say maybe the biggest issues with the Abominant is that the Volkite's quite low AP, and it could be a bit painful if you're shooting against high save targets. The melee weapons are fairly infantry tailored and are also quite low AP, and it means that you won't be able to take Abhor the Witch, and also try and make sure that you can hide this if at all possible on the first round of the game. Perhaps the main thing that you want to avoid is losing loads of health before you get your psychic buff up, as being alpha struck means that it's not going to get that extra durability that would be the main reason that you'd want to take him. Overall though, I think the Abominant seems solid. I wouldn't be surprised if they make it into a fair few competitive Chaos Knight lists. It's going to be interesting to see what people make of them and what sort of combos they choose to use. Anyway, I think we'll leave that there for the video. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think that this guy makes the cut? And if so, what sort of things would you be thinking about using for him? If you'd like to see more like this, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k things coming, with new videos out just about every day. Hopefully we'll have a fair bit more out for the Imperial and Chaos Knights later on. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention quickly that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.